I stood alone outside my parents' house on Thanksgiving, watching through the window as my family laughed with Allison, my ex-wife. The woman who had systematically torn my life apart was now sitting in my chair, eating my mother's cooking, sharing stories with my father. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could reach. How could my own flesh and blood choose an outsider over me? How could they replace their son with the very person who destroyed him? Before I share how I turned this nightmare around, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I reclaimed my dignity after the ultimate family betrayal. I was 32 years old when my world collapsed, but to understand how everything fell apart, you need to know who I was before Allison entered the picture. I had built a promising career as an architect at a respected firm in Boston. My colleagues appreciated my straightforward approach and creative solutions, even if my bluntness occasionally ruffled feathers. Outside work, my life revolved around my close-knit family. We were the kind of family that gathered for Sunday dinners without fail, celebrated every birthday with enthusiasm, and maintained holiday traditions that stretched back generations. My parents, Richard and Margaret, had always been my biggest supporters. Dad, a retired high school principal, had instilled in me a strong work ethic and moral compass. Mom, who ran a small bakery, showed her love through food and unwavering encouragement. My younger sister Jessica and I shared a special bond. Only 2 years apart, we had been inseparable growing up and remained confidants into adulthood. My older brother Daniel was more complicated. 5 years, my senior and working as a successful corporate lawyer, there had always been an undercurrent of competition between us that our parents never quite addressed. Extended family played important roles too. My cousin Laura was like another sister, and her brother Mark had been my best man. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, we all lived within an hour of each other and gathered frequently. Family was my foundation, my safety net, my identity. I never imagined they could turn on me so completely. I met Allison at a charity gala for the Children's Hospital. I was there representing my firm, which had donated design services for their new wing. She was volunteering at the check-in table, and I was immediately struck by her vibrant presence. With auburn hair that caught the light and a laugh that commanded attention, Allison was magnetic. When she handed me my name badge, our fingers touched, and she held my gaze a second longer than necessary. "Architecture sounds fascinating," she said after I introduced myself. "I have always been interested in how spaces affect people." By the end of the night, we had spent hours talking in a quiet corner of the venue, ignoring the speeches and auction. I learned she worked in public relations, loved classic films, and had just moved to Boston from Chicago after a bad breakup. There was something refreshing about her directness and enthusiasm. I asked for her number before the night ended, feeling an excitement I had not experienced in years. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Allison was spontaneous and affectionate, planning surprise picnics and leaving thoughtful notes in my briefcase. When I introduced her to my family a month into our relationship, they were instantly charmed. My mother, usually reserved with my girlfriends, invited Allison to help in the kitchen, a rare honor. Dad engaged her in lengthy conversations about politics, nodding appreciatively at her well-formed opinions. Jessica declared her the one after a single afternoon of shopping together. Even Daniel, who typically maintained a cool distance from anyone I dated, seemed impressed by her knowledge of legal matters and her connections in the city. By our 3rd month together, Allison had become a fixture at family gatherings, often arriving before me and staying later to help clean up. "You hit the jackpot with this one," my mother whispered during our Christmas celebration, watching as Allison organized a gift exchange game that had everyone laughing. She fits so perfectly with us. I proposed 6 months after we met, caught up in the infectious joy Allison brought into my life. The wedding, held in my parents' backyard, was everything Allison wanted. She planned each detail, meticulously consulting my mother and sister at every turn. I was happy to see her so invested and pleased by how seamlessly she had integrated into my family. Looking back, I should have noticed the subtle changes that began after the honeymoon. Alone in our new house, Allison was different. The warmth she displayed in public cooled considerably behind closed doors. Small criticisms peppered her conversation. Comments about my clothes, my friends, my habits that she had never mentioned before. "Do you always chew so loudly?" she would ask at dinner. "And that shirt really does nothing for your complexion. You should let me pick out your clothes more often." These remarks seemed minor, hardly worth confronting, but they accumulated, forming an invisible weight that pressed down on me daily. I began to second-guess myself, to wonder if I had somehow misrepresented who I was during our courtship. Meanwhile, Allison continued to strengthen her relationship with my family, often without me. She would have lunch with my mother on weekdays, help my father with his garden, and attend yoga classes with Jessica. She knew everyone's preferences, birthdays, and inside jokes. She collected information like currency, particularly about family tensions and old wounds. "Did you know your brother still resents you for getting the scholarship he applied for?" she mentioned casually one evening. "And your cousin Mark apparently felt overlooked at the wedding. He told your aunt he thought you had replaced him with work friends." I would express surprise at these revelations, wondering when and how she had uncovered these private grievances. I began to notice how conversations shifted when I entered rooms, as though my presence interrupted something intimate. Once returning early from a work trip, I overheard Allison speaking to my mother in our kitchen. "Simon has always been so sensitive," she was saying, her voice concerned but slightly condescending. "I worry about his reaction to even the smallest criticism. Sometimes I feel like I am walking on eggshells around his moods." "He gets that from his father," my mother replied, with a sigh that suggested long-time resignation. "Men in this family have fragile egos. You learn to work around it." I stood frozen in the hallway, a suitcase in my hand, and disbelief washing over me. Was this how they spoke about me when I was absent? Had my mother always seen me this way? I cleared my throat before entering, watching as their expressions shifted to bright, to welcomes, the previous conversation vanishing into strained smiles. That moment marked the first real crack in the foundation of what I had believed was a perfect match, both in my marriage and in how Allison fit with my family. It was a hairline fracture that would soon spread, threatening everything I had built. The cracks in my marriage widened during our second year together, revealing fundamental problems I had been too blind to see. I discovered Allison had misrepresented significant aspects of her past. She had claimed to have graduated with honors from Northwestern, but a chance conversation with an actual alumnus revealed inconsistencies in her stories. When confronted, she dismissed it as a misunderstanding, saying she had attended classes there but completed her degree elsewhere due to family circumstances. This explanation seemed reasonable, but it planted a seed of doubt. Financial discrepancies emerged next. Our joint accounts never quite balanced, with unexpected withdrawals. Allison attributed to gifts for my family or household expenses that seemed excessive. When I suggested we review our budget together, she accused me of not trusting her and reminded me how much my family appreciated her thoughtfulness. "Your mother loved the crystal vase I bought her," she would say. "And Jessica said no one has ever been so generous with her. Is that the reputation you want, Simon? The cheap son who questions every gift." These manipulations worked, making me feel petty and controlling for asking reasonable questions. Meanwhile, Allison began attending family functions without me, citing my work schedule as the reason, even when I was available. The first major exclusion came when my father's birthday was being planned. "We have got it handled," Jessica told me when I asked about preparations. "Allison and I have been organizing everything for weeks. She has amazing ideas for the party." "But I wanted to help," I protested. "He is my father, too." "You are always so busy," Jessica replied, her tone slightly dismissive. "Besides, Allison knows what Dad likes even better than you do sometimes." The birthday celebration was elaborate and personalized in ways that made me feel like an outsider. Allison had created a photo montage of family moments, many from before she had even entered our lives. Yet, she narrated it as though she had always been there. My father beamed with appreciation, barely acknowledging my expensive gift in favor of praising Allison's thoughtfulness. That night, I finally confronted her about what felt increasingly like a campaign to separate me from my family. "You are being paranoid," she said, her voice calm, but her eyes cold. "I am simply trying to build relationships with the people who matter to you. Most men would appreciate a wife who gets along so well with their family." "Getting along is one thing," I replied. "Taking over and pushing me to the sidelines is another. It feels like you are trying to replace me." Her expression changed then, a flash of something calculating before she burst into tears. "How could you say something so hurtful? I have done nothing but try to be part of this family, and you make it sound like I have some sinister agenda." The argument escalated with Allison eventually storming out and driving to my parents' house. When she returned the next morning, she informed me that my mother thought I was being unreasonable and working too hard, suggesting perhaps I needed counseling for stress. This pattern continued for months. Every confrontation ended with my family being leveraged against me, reinforcing my growing isolation. After discovering messages suggesting Allison was being less than truthful about where she spent her time, I reached my breaking point. "I think we should separate," I said during a rare moment, when her defenses seemed lower. "This is not working for either of us." Her reaction was a masterclass in manipulation. First came devastation tears streaming, as she begged me to reconsider, claiming she could not live without me. When this did not move me, her demeanor transformed completely. "You will regret this," she said, her voice suddenly steady and cold. "You think you can just throw me away. I am more a part of your family now than you are. By the time I am done, they will not even miss you." True to her word, Allison launched an immediate campaign to villainize me to everyone who would listen. According to her version, I had become controlling and emotionally abusive, had mismanaged our finances, and had even implied I was seeing someone else. She carefully tailored her stories to exploit each family member's existing concerns or insecurities about me. To my mother, she emphasized my apparent emotional unavailability, knowing Mom had always worried I kept my feelings too bottled up. To my father, she suggested financial irresponsibility, touching on his lifelong emphasis on security and planning. With Jessica, she hinted at supposed criticisms I had made about my sister's life choices playing on Jessica's existing insecurities. Daniel, perhaps sensing an opportunity to assert his position as the more reliable son, became Allison's strongest advocate, offering her legal advice and publicly declaring his disappointment in me. Even my cousins, aunts, and uncles received personalized versions of Allison's distortions. I tried desperately to defend myself, to explain my side of the story, but found myself outmaneuvered at every turn. Any attempt to reveal Allison's manipulations was dismissed as bitterness, or an attempt to deflect from my own failings. The harder I fought, the more I seemed to confirm their negative perceptions. The situation reached a breaking point. During a family dinner, I had been reluctantly invited to, ostensibly, to discuss the separation civilly. Instead, I walked into an ambush. Seated around my parents' dining table with Allison at my father's right hand, in what had always been my place, my family took turns expressing their disappointment in me. "We raised you to be better than this," my father said, his voice heavy with judgment. "To honor your commitments and treat people with respect. Allison has been nothing but good to this family," my mother added. "I do not understand how you could throw away something so precious." "You have always been selfish," Daniel contributed, "but this reaches a new level even for you." Jessica, who had once been my closest ally, simply stared at her plate, occasionally nodding in agreement with the others. The cousins I had grown up with, the aunts and uncles who had cheered at my graduations, all sat in silent judgment. Allison watched it all with an expression of dignified suffering, occasionally wiping away a tear but maintaining her composure. When I tried to speak to defend myself with specific examples of her behavior, I was cut off repeatedly. "There you go again, twisting things," my father interrupted. Typical. I left that dinner understanding that I had lost not just my wife, but my entire support system. The divorce proceedings that followed were brutal. Allison, armed with my family's support and information they provided, seemed to anticipate my every move. She demanded an unreasonable portion of assets we had acquired together, and even some that were solely mine from before the marriage. Her lawyer, recommended by my brother, was aggressive and well-connected. Meanwhile, I struggled to find adequate representation as several attorneys declined after learning who opposed me, citing conflicts of interest or simply being too busy. The ones willing to take my case seemed lackluster in their efforts, perhaps influenced by the social and professional connections Allison and my family leveraged. Financial pressures mounted as legal fees drained my savings, and Allison contested access to our joint accounts. I was forced to move into a small apartment, having left our house to avoid constant confrontation. Professionally, I began to suffer as well, with Allison apparently reaching out to contacts at my firm to share her version of events, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere that affected my work performance. Through it all, the most painful aspect was the complete abandonment by my family. Holiday invitations stopped coming. Calls went unreturned. Family events took place without my knowledge, documented in social media posts that showed Allison still firmly entrenched as a beloved member of the group that had once been my greatest source of security. I had never felt more alone or more betrayed. The people who had known me my entire life, who should have at least questioned the sudden transformation Allison described, had chosen to believe the worst about me without hesitation. The foundation I had built my identity upon had crumbled completely, leaving me adrift and questioning everything I thought I knew about family love and loyalty. As fall progressed and Thanksgiving approached, I maintained minimal contact with my family, focusing instead on surviving each day. The divorce proceedings dragged on, with Allison finding new ways to delay and complicate matters, extracting maximum emotional and financial cost. I threw myself into work, took on extra projects, and spent evenings alone in my apartment, trying to rebuild some sense of self amid the ruins of my former life. The call from my mother came 3 days before Thanksgiving, her voice stiff with formality. "We are having dinner at 4 on Thursday," she said without preamble. "Allison will be there. You can come if you want, but please do not make a scene. We just want a peaceful holiday." The casual cruelty of the invitation struck me speechless momentarily. When I found my voice, it was surprisingly steady. "Allison will be there. At our family Thanksgiving." "She is still family to us, Simon," my mother replied defensively. "She has been through a lot, and I have not. Your actual son." I heard my mother sigh, that familiar sound of disappointment. "This is exactly what I mean about scenes, Simon. You can come as long as you keep your mouth shut, and do not pull one of your pathetic displays of temper. We just want a nice dinner." The words hit like physical blows. Pathetic. Keep your mouth shut. The realization that they viewed me as the disruptive element, the problem to be managed, crystallized in that moment. My response came from some deep, previously untapped well of self-respect. "Do not worry, Mom. I would rather eat with strangers than sit with traitors. Enjoy your dinner." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking but my mind suddenly startlingly clear. Standing in my small kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of the life I was trying to rebuild, something fundamental shifted within me. I was done being the victim in this story. That night, I could not sleep. Instead, I spread out all the documentation I had gathered throughout my marriage and divorce, from financial records to text messages, emails, to legal filings. For the first time, I looked at everything not with pain but with analytical detachment, as though studying the blueprint of a demolition project. Patterns emerged that I had been too close to see before. Allison's systematic approach to isolating me. The carefully tailored narratives she created for each family member. The financial irregularities that suggested problems beyond simple overspending. Looking at our wedding photos, I noticed something I had missed before: how Allison positioned herself in every shot, subtly edging me to the periphery, while centering herself within my family groupings. The next morning, I called an old college friend, Trevor, who had become a clinical psychologist, specializing in relationship trauma. I laid out the situation without emotion, simply presenting the facts as I now understood them. "What you are describing sounds like classic, manipulative behavior," Trevor said after listening. "The love bombing at the beginning, the isolation tactics, the triangulation with family members, the smear campaign. These are hallmarks of someone with potentially serious personality issues." "Why could I not see it?" I asked. "And why can my family still not see it?" "These individuals are incredibly skilled at presenting different faces to different people," Trevor explained. "They intuitively understand others' vulnerabilities and desires. Your family sees only the version of her that she wants them to see, and she has methodically undermined your credibility so that any warnings from you are dismissed as bitterness or jealousy. Our conversation continued for hours, with Trevor helping me understand the psychological mechanics of what had happened. By the end, I felt armed with knowledge and perspective that had previously eluded me. I was not crazy. I was not the villain. I had been targeted by someone exceptionally skilled at manipulation, and my family had been weaponized against me. "What do I do now?" I asked finally. "That depends on what you want," Trevor replied. "Do you want to reclaim your relationship with your family? Or are you ready to walk away and build something new?" The question resonated deeply. What did I want? The answer surprised me with its clarity. I wanted the truth to be known. Not for revenge, but for liberation. I could not move forward while this distorted narrative defined me both to my family and in my own mind. Over the next 4 days, I developed a strategic plan. First, I hired a reputable private investigator to verify suspicions about Allison's background and current activities. The preliminary report confirmed what I had begun to piece together. Her claimed education credentials were largely fabricated. She had a history of similar relationship patterns in Chicago, and there were unexplained financial activities that warranted further investigation. Next, I consulted a new attorney, one recommended by Trevor from outside my usual professional circles, unconnected to my family's influence. After reviewing my case, she identified several approaches we could take to counter Allison's tactics in the divorce proceedings, including potential evidence of financial misconduct that could change the settlement dynamics significantly. On the digital front, I discovered online support communities for people who had experienced similar situations. Through these forums, I connected with 2 individuals from Chicago who claimed to know Allison under a slightly different name and described relationship patterns strikingly similar to my experience. Their willingness to provide statements added another layer to the evidence I was compiling. The final piece came together on Thanksgiving morning. I created a comprehensive digital presentation organizing all the evidence, testimonials, financial records, and psychological insights into a clear, factual narrative. I was not crafting a bitter diatribe, but rather a measured exposé of a systematic deception. At exactly 2 o'clock, when I knew my family would be gathering for pre-dinner drinks, I sent identical emails to each family member, including extended relatives who had been part of the Judgment Coalition. The subject line was simple: "The truth you deserve to know." The email contained a link to a private website I had created, password protected, with our family's traditional holiday toast, something only legitimate recipients would know. Once accessed, the site presented my case methodically, without emotional appeals or accusations against my family members. I positioned them not as co-conspirators, but as additional victims of Allison's manipulation, offering understanding for how they had been deceived. Simultaneously, I went live on a private social media channel I had created, speaking directly and calmly to whoever might be watching, expanding on the written materials with personal context, and responding to any questions that came in. I maintained a tone of dignity and factuality, refusing to descend into bitterness despite the temptation. The response was faster and more dramatic than I had anticipated. Within an hour, my phone began lighting up with messages and missed calls. I let them go to voicemail, committed to maintaining the boundary I had established. By 4 o'clock, when the turkey would have been served, the messages had become increasingly urgent. My cousin Laura was the first to break through my resolve. Her voicemail, choked with tears, pierced the armor I had constructed. "Simon, everything is falling apart here. Please call me back. We were so wrong, all of us. Everything's falling apart, and we need you to help us fix it. Please." Similar messages followed from Jessica, from aunts and uncles, even from my father, whose gruff voice carried an unfamiliar note of confusion and regret. My brother Daniel was notably absent from the cascade of communications. Only my mother left a message that still contained hints of defensiveness, though even she acknowledged that things have come to light that we need to discuss. I maintained my silence that evening, spending Thanksgiving, instead, at a community dinner organized by coworkers who had stood by me throughout the ordeal. Surrounded by people who had no preconceptions about me, who knew me only through my actions and character in the present, I experienced a strange, new-feeling peace. Whatever happened with my family now, I had reclaimed my narrative, and in doing so, my sense of self. 2 days after Thanksgiving, I finally agreed to meet my parents at a coffee shop downtown Neutral Territory suggested by my new attorney. They arrived together but sat uncomfortably across from me, looking older and more uncertain than I remembered. My father, usually commanding any space he occupied, seemed diminished, while my mother's normally perfect appearance showed signs of hasty preparation. "Thank you for meeting us," my father began, uncharacteristically tentative. "I want to be clear," I said before they could continue. "I am not here to be persuaded back into the family fold as though nothing happened. I am here because, despite everything I believe, in giving people the chance to make amends, if they genuinely want to." My directness clearly surprised them. In the past, I had always eventually yielded to family pressure, seeking reconciliation at any cost. "We did not know," my mother said, tears forming, "how she had manipulated things," twisted words. "The things she said about you, they seemed to explain behaviors we had sometimes worried about. It felt like pieces falling into place, but they were false pieces." "You never asked me," I replied, keeping my voice level despite the emotion rising in my chest. "Not once did anyone in our family say, 'This does not sound like Simon, let me hear his side.' You accepted her version without question. Because it was easier," my father admitted, surprising me with his candor. "Allison made everything smooth, anticipated needs, remembered details. And the story she told about you becoming controlling, jealous of her relationships with us, it played into concerns we already had about how work was changing you. We believed what we were primed to believe." The conversation continued for hours, painful but necessary. My mother cried when describing how Thanksgiving had imploded after family members began accessing the information I had shared. Allison had tried to discredit it, then became defensive, then finally lashed out with such venom that her carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. "She called us gullible idiots," my mother said, still sounding shocked. "Said we deserved whatever happened because we were too stupid to see what was happening. Jessica tried to defend us, and Allison told her she was just a pathetic spinster who latched onto her because she had no life of her own." "Where is she now?" I asked, realizing I felt no satisfaction from Allison's downfall, only a dull relief. "Gone," my father replied. "She stormed out." Daniel followed her, trying to calm her down. He came back an hour later looking shaken. Said some things had become clear to him, and he needed time to process. My brother's reaction did not surprise me. His pride would make acknowledging his error particularly difficult. Of everyone in the family, he had positioned himself most firmly as Allison's champion and my critic. As our meeting concluded, my parents asked the inevitable question, "Can you forgive us? Can we rebuild?" "Forgiveness is not an event. It is a process," I replied, borrowing Trevor's words. "And rebuilding requires new foundations, not just patching over cracked ones. I am open to starting that process, but it will happen on new terms, with boundaries I need respected." Those boundaries became the framework for my re-entry into family relationships. I insisted on individual conversations with each family member, rather than group absolution. I required acknowledgement of specific actions, and their impact, not just generic apologies. And I made clear that certain topics, particularly my ongoing divorce proceedings, were off-limits for discussion. Over the following weeks, these conversations unfolded, some more successful than others. Jessica and I reconnected most easily, our sibling bond resilient, despite the damage. My cousin Laura became an unexpected ally, her psychological background, helping her understand the dynamics at play, and facilitating conversations with other extended family members. Daniel proved the most difficult. We eventually met for a tense lunch, where his apology came wrapped in justifications. "I was trying to protect the family," he insisted. "I thought you were the threat." Only when I stood to leave did he finally offer something more genuine. "I was wrong and I am sorry. Really sorry." Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings took a dramatic turn. With my new evidence and more assertive legal representation, Allison's position weakened considerably. Her lawyer, sensing the shift, began pushing for a quick settlement. Financial investigations revealed concerning patterns that my attorney suggested might interest the authorities, creating additional leverage. When we finally met face-to-face in a mediation session, Allison tried one last manipulation, alternating between tears and veiled threats. When these failed to move me, she resorted to cold fury. "They will see through you," eventually she hissed during a break. "Your family, your friends, they will remember why they chose me." Looking at her, I felt an unexpected calm. "No, Allison, they chose a fiction you created. That is finished now." The divorce finalized 3 months later with terms far more equitable than Allison had initially demanded. As we left the courthouse, she attempted a parting shot about ensuring I would regret crossing her. I simply walked away, her words no longer holding any power over me. With the legal battles concluded, I focused on rebuilding my life. My career, which had suffered during the worst of the crisis, began to recover as I channeled my architectural skills into a new specialization: community spaces, designed for healing and connection. A project creating a center for family therapy became particularly meaningful, allowing me to transform my experience into something constructive. Personally, I joined a support group Trevor recommended for survivors of manipulative relationships. Hearing others' stories helped contextualize my experience and accelerate my healing. Eventually, I began helping facilitate sessions, finding purpose in guiding others through their recovery journeys. Family relationships slowly mended, though never returning to their previous configuration. Instead, something healthier emerged with greater respect for boundaries and more authentic communication. Holiday gatherings resumed, now held at various homes, rather than always at my parents', a small but significant redistribution of family power. About a year after the divorce, I met Hannah at a workshop on community-based design. A landscape architect with a direct manner and genuine warmth, she approached relationships with refreshing honesty. Our connection developed, gradually built on mutual respect and transparent communication. When I eventually shared my experience with Allison, Hannah's response was simple: "Thank you for trusting me with that story. It sounds like you have done incredible work to heal." As I reflect on the journey from that Thanksgiving when I stood outside looking in to where I am now, I recognize how completely my understanding of family has transformed. True family, I have learned, does not require blind loyalty, but rather earned trust. It involves mutual respect for boundaries and the courage to speak difficult truths. Most importantly, it means loving people for who they genuinely are, not for who we need them to be. The betrayal I experienced was devastating precisely because family represents our most fundamental sense of belonging. When that foundation crumbles, we must build a new one, stone by stone, with materials tested for their strength and authenticity. The structure that results may be different from what we originally imagined, but it can be more resilient, more truthful, and ultimately more nurturing than what came before. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from those we never imagined could hurt us, the people we believed would stand beside us no matter what. But I have learned that from these profound injuries can emerge our greatest strength, the courage to stand firm in our truth and rebuild our lives with intention and self-respect. In the end, the family we choose, the boundaries we establish, and the truth we insist upon become the legacy we create for ourselves. Have you ever had to rebuild trust with family after a betrayal? What boundaries did you establish to protect yourself while healing relationships? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they are not alone in facing family betrayal. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that reclaiming your truth is always worth the struggle, no matter how difficult the path may seem.